The morning air on Zenthra Prime carried the sharp scent of ozone and metallic dust as Cadet 647 adjusted his environmental suit for the third time in 10 minutes. The young Kathrani's forearms moved with nervous precision, checking seals and pressure readings that he had already verified twice before. Around him, dozens of other cadets from across the galaxy prepared for what their instructors called the most important lesson of your military careers. "Stop fidgeting, Zix," growled Cadet Tharak, a massive Gorvani whose rocky exterior made him look like a walking boulder. "You're making everyone nervous." Zix's large, violet eyes darted toward his friend. "How can you be calm? We're about to learn about the forbidden records. The ones they never let anyone below Admiral rank access." Beside them, Cadet Lyra twisted her serpentine neck, the scales along her throat shifting from blue to worried green. "My grandmother served in the Third Galactic War," she whispered, her voice carrying the musical tones of her Solani heritage. "She always said there were things about that war we weren't supposed to know. Things about why certain species were restricted." The conversation died as Admiral Kethvor emerged from the compound's main building. The ancient Zarathi moved with the careful dignity of someone who had seen too much and lived too long. His crystalline exoskeleton caught the light of Zenthra's twin suns, creating rainbow patterns that should have been beautiful but somehow seemed ominous in the morning's tense atmosphere. "Cadets," his voice resonated through their comm systems, carrying the weight of absolute authority. "Today you will learn why the Galactic Defense Accords contain Article 847b. Today you will understand why one species, despite their obvious military potential, is permanently banned from participating in any galactic conflict." Zix felt his breathing apparatus hitch. He had studied Article 847b in his xenopolitics classes, but the details were always classified. All he knew was that it pertained to humans, the strange bipedal species from the small blue world called Earth in the Orion Arm's outer territories. "Before we proceed," Admiral Kethvor continued, "I want each of you to understand that what you learn today is classified at the highest levels. You will speak of this to no one outside this group. The knowledge you gain here will help you understand why our current peace has lasted for over 200 standard cycles." The Admiral gestured toward a low, bunker-like building set apart from the main Academy complex. "This is Archive Vault 7. Inside are the complete records of the Terran intervention event, recorded during the Third Galactic War. What you will witness is not simulation, not recreation, but actual battlefield footage recovered from both our forces and those of the enemy." As they walked toward the vault, Cadet Jorix, a tall, mantis-like being from the Chitani Collective, raised one of his blade arms. "Sir, if humans are banned from warfare, why are we studying them at all? Surely they can't be that significant militarily." Admiral Kethvor stopped walking. His ancient eyes seemed to look through time itself. "Cadet Jorix, by the end of today, you will understand that humans are not banned from galactic warfare because they are weak. They are banned because they are too strong. Too unpredictable. Too willing to sacrifice everything for principles that most species cannot even comprehend." The vault's doors were massive, designed to withstand planetary bombardment. As they cycled open, cold air rushed out, carrying with it the sterile scent of preserved data and ancient fears. Inside, the chamber was dominated by a holographic display system that could recreate entire battlefields with perfect clarity. "Please, take your seats," the Admiral instructed, his voice softer now, almost paternal. "What you are about to witness occurred during the siege of Korthak 7, in the fourth year of the Third Galactic War. Our forces, along with those of 12 allied species, were locked in combat with the Vorthak Empire. The Vorthak, as you know, were a species that believed in the complete subjugation of all other sentient life. The lights dimmed, and, suddenly, the cadets found themselves seemingly floating above a massive battlefield. The holographic recreation was so detailed they could see individual soldiers, smell the acrid smoke of energy weapons, hear the screams of the wounded and dying. The siege had lasted for 18 months, Admiral Kethvor's voice continued as the battle raged around them. Korthak 7 was home to 14 billion civilians of various species. The Vorthak were prepared to exterminate them all rather than allow the planet to remain free. Our forces were losing. We had lost 60% of our fleet, and our ground forces were being pushed back toward the evacuation zones. Zix watched in fascination as Gorvani tanks rolled across the battlefield, their massive forms providing cover for advancing Solani shock troops. In the sky above, Kathrani fighters engaged Vorthak interceptors in deadly aerial ballets. The scope of the conflict was overwhelming. At this point in the war, the Admiral continued, Earth had been contacted by both sides. The humans were a newly discovered species, having only achieved faster-than-light travel 50 standard years earlier. Both we and the Vortak sent diplomatic missions, hoping to gain their allegiance. The scene shifted, showing a small blue-green world orbiting a yellow star. Spacecraft from multiple civilizations approached the planet, their designs ranging from the elegant curves of Solani vessels to the angular brutality of Vortak warships. The humans listened to both sides, Admiral Kethvor said. They heard our pleas for help against an empire that sought to enslave the galaxy. They also heard the Vortak promises of power and territory in exchange for alliance. And then, they made a decision that changed the course of galactic history. Thorak leaned forward, his rocky features creased with concentration. They chose our side? Not exactly, the Admiral replied. They chose neither side. Instead, they declared that they would protect any world where civilians were threatened, regardless of which faction controlled it. They said that the wholesale slaughter of non-combatants was unacceptable to them, no matter what political gains might be achieved. The scene shifted again, showing human vessels emerging from hyperspace. Zix was surprised by their appearance. Unlike the smooth, organic curves favored by most species, human ships were angular, functional, almost primitive-looking. They were smaller than most galactic standard vessels, and their weapons seemed outdated. Initially, neither side took them seriously, Admiral Kethvor admitted. Their technology was centuries behind ours. Their ships were slow, their weapons were crude, and they had no shields worthy of the name. The Vortak actually laughed at their demands for an immediate ceasefire and the beginning of civilian evacuations. Lyra's scales shifted to a curious yellow. What happened next? The holographic display zoomed in on one of the human vessels. Through its viewports, they could see the bridge crew. The beings inside looked remarkably similar to several galactic species, but there was something different in their postures, in the way they moved. Something that made Zix feel oddly uncomfortable. The humans issued one final warning, the Admiral said. They gave both fleets exactly 1 standard hour to begin civilian evacuations or withdraw from the system entirely. When both sides refused, the humans did something that no military strategist in galactic history had ever predicted. The display showed the human fleet moving not toward either of the warring fleets, but directly toward Korthak VII's surface. Their ships, small as they were, began deploying what appeared to be landing craft. They invaded the planet? Jorix asked, his blade arms clicking with agitation. No, Cadet. They invaded the battlefields. While our forces and the Vortak continued fighting for control of the planet, the humans simply landed in the middle of our combat zones and began evacuating civilians. They ignored both armies completely. The scene that followed left the cadets speechless. Human soldiers, equipped with primitive armor and basic energy weapons, were moving through active battlefields. They carried wounded civilians to their transport craft, set up medical stations in bombed-out buildings, and established safe corridors through areas where Gorvani and Vortak forces were actively exchanging fire. This is impossible, Thorak rumbled. They should have been cut to pieces. Neither side would tolerate that kind of interference. You would think so, Admiral Kethvor agreed. And, indeed, both sides did open fire on human forces. The Vortak because they saw the humans as obstacles to their extermination campaigns. Our own forces because they viewed the human intervention as a dangerous disruption of established battle lines. The display showed energy bolts and projectiles striking human positions. Zix watched as human soldiers fell, their primitive armor no match for advanced military weapons. But something strange was happening. For every human that fell, 2 more seemed to take their place. The humans weren't retreating or responding with military force. Instead, they were adapting. Watch carefully, the Admiral instructed. This is where human nature began to reveal itself. The cadets saw human engineers working under fire to modify their equipment. Primitive energy shields began appearing around evacuation sites. Human soldiers started moving in patterns that seemed to anticipate enemy fire. Most disturbing of all, humans who had been wounded continued fighting, often improvising weapons from battlefield debris. They're not following any recognized military doctrine, Lyra observed, her scales now a confused orange. They're just adapting in real time. Exactly, Admiral Kethvor confirmed. Humans, we learned, have an evolutionary trait that most species lack. They are persistence hunters. On their home world, they evolved not to outrun their prey or overpower it, but to simply outlast it. They will continue pursuing a goal long after any reasonable being would give up. The battle footage continued, showing human forces somehow maintaining their evacuation efforts despite being vastly outgunned. They used destroyed buildings as cover, turned crater holes into medical stations, and somehow managed to keep their transport ships running evacuation flights even as both armies tried to stop them. This continued for 72 standard hours, the admiral said. Our military analysts kept expecting the humans to either withdraw or escalate to full military engagement. Instead, they simply kept doing exactly what they had said they would do, evacuating civilians. Zix noticed something else strange in the footage. Wherever humans established their evacuation zones, both armies seemed to become less effective. Weapons fire was less accurate, tactical decisions appeared confused, and unit cohesion began breaking down. Admiral, Zix asked hesitantly, why did our forces and the Vortak start fighting so poorly around the human positions? The old Zarathi's expression grew grim. Because, Cadet Zix, humans have another trait that we severely underestimated. They are highly social beings with a powerful capacity for empathy. But, more than that, they have the ability to inspire that same empathy in others, even in the middle of combat. The display showed close-up footage of human medics treating wounded soldiers from both armies. They made no distinction between friend and enemy, treating Gorvani, Vortak, and their own wounded with equal care. More disturbing still, soldiers from both armies had begun helping with the evacuations. The humans weren't just evacuating civilians, Admiral Kethvor explained. They were demonstrating a concept that most military thinking considers impossible, the idea that the protection of innocent life is more important than strategic objectives. And, somehow, they were making others believe it too. Thorak's rocky features showed confusion. But, that's not how war works. Strategic objectives must take priority, or the war itself becomes meaningless. That, said the Admiral, is exactly what the humans believed was wrong with our entire approach to warfare. And, they were about to prove it in the most dramatic way possible. The holographic display shifted to show the command centers of both fleets. In the Galactic Defense Force Command Center, Admiral Vorketh, Kethvor's predecessor, was arguing with his staff about the human intervention. In the Vortak Command Center, War Leader Thakmor was expressing similar frustration. Both commanders reached the same conclusion, Admiral Kethvor continued. The human interference had to be stopped, even if it meant temporarily ceasing hostilities between our forces and the Vortak. So they agreed to a limited cooperation. Both fleets would combine their firepower to eliminate the human forces, and then resume their own conflict. The scene showed something that should have been impossible: Galactic Defense Force ships flying in formation with Vortak vessels, all their weapons trained on the small human fleet still orbiting Korthak 7. The combined firepower was enormous, the Admiral said quietly. More than enough to vaporize every human ship and ground force on the planet. The humans received our joint ultimatum: withdraw immediately or be destroyed. Their response was recorded for posterity. A new voice filled the chamber, speaking in the oddly musical language that humans called English, with translation appearing as text: we acknowledge your ultimatum. We respectfully decline. Civilian evacuation will continue. If you fire on evacuation sites, we will consider it an act of war against neutral humanitarian forces. Jorix's blade arms clicked frantically. They threatened both fleets? With their tiny force? They weren't threatening, Admiral Kethvor corrected. They were simply stating a fact. And, then, they did something that forever changed how the galaxy views warfare. The display showed the moment when both fleets opened fire. Hundreds of energy beams and projectile weapons struck human positions simultaneously. The small human ships should have been vaporized instantly. Instead, something impossible happened. The humans fought back. But, not in any way that galactic military doctrine could have predicted. As their ships came under fire, they didn't attempt to engage the vastly superior fleets. Instead, they did something that left both command centers staring in disbelief. They rammed us, Admiral Kethvor said simply. Not their military vessels, those they kept back to protect the evacuation ships. Instead, they converted civilian craft, industrial vessels, even personal spacecraft into improvised weapons. Humans who had no military training whatsoever volunteered to pilot ships directly into our battle formations. The footage showed human cargo haulers, mining ships, and passenger liners accelerating toward the combined fleet. The vessels had been hastily modified with the most primitive ramming attachments, and many were clearly breaking apart under the stress of acceleration.
But they kept coming.
This was unprecedented, the admiral continued. In the entire history of galactic warfare, civilians had never voluntarily entered combat zones to support military operations. But humans weren't just civilians, they were parents, teachers, engineers, artists, all volunteering for what they knew was almost certain death.
Zix watched in horror as the improvised human vessels struck home.
The damage to individual ships was minimal, a cargo hauler couldn't seriously threaten a military vessel. But the psychological impact was devastating. Soldiers from dozens of species found themselves firing on beings who were clearly non-combatants, who had no chance of survival, but who kept coming anyway.
The effect on morale was catastrophic, Admiral Kethvor admitted.
Our crews began refusing orders to fire on what were obviously civilian targets.
Vorthack units started suffering equipment malfunctions that their engineers later admitted were probably deliberate sabotage by their own personnel.
The battle footage showed the impossible, a combined fleet of hundreds of advanced warships being effectively neutralized by a few dozen primitive human vessels and a handful of volunteers who simply refused to stop saving lives.
But the worst was yet to come, the admiral said, his voice heavy with old grief. Because the humans had one more surprise for us.
The scene shifted to show human ground forces on Korthak 7. The beings that the cadets saw bore little resemblance to the soldiers they had observed at the beginning of the intervention.
These humans moved differently, fought differently.
72 hours of continuous combat had changed them, Admiral Kethvor explained. And we began to understand why humans were the apex predators on their home world.
The humans on screen were no longer just evacuating civilians. They were hunting.
They had identified the command structures of both armies, the admiral continued.
And they began systematically eliminating them.
Not through superior firepower or advanced tactics, but through sheer persistence and an apparently unlimited willingness to sacrifice themselves for their objectives. Zix watched as small groups of humans moved through the battlefield with single-minded determination. They bypassed major enemy formations, ignored strategic targets, and focused entirely on eliminating the leaders who were preventing civilian evacuations. They were using themselves as weapons, Lyra whispered, her scales now a sickly gray color.
Exactly, Admiral Kethvor confirmed. Human soldiers would identify a command post and then simply walk toward it.
When enemy fire stopped them, they would wait for medical treatment, then continue walking toward their target. When their weapons were destroyed, they would pick up debris and continue advancing. When their comrades fell, they would take their equipment and keep moving. The footage showed scenes that would haunt the cadets for the rest of their lives. Humans advancing through energy weapon fire that should have stopped any biological creature. Humans using the bodies of their own fallen comrades as cover while continuing their advance. Humans who had lost limbs to weapon fire continuing to crawl toward their objectives. The breaking point came when a single human soldier reached Admiral Vorketha's command post, the admiral said quietly. The soldier was a female named Sarah Chen, a former teacher who had volunteered for the evacuation mission. She had been shot 17 times, had lost her left arm to energy weapon fire, and had been advancing toward the command post for 6 hours. The display showed a battered figure in primitive armor somehow making it through multiple defensive perimeters. The human's equipment was destroyed, her weapon was gone, and she was clearly dying. But she kept moving. When she reached the command post, she didn't attack, Admiral Kethvor continued. Instead, she spoke. Her words were recorded and have become part of the Galactic military archives.
The same musical human voice filled the chamber. We don't want to fight you. We just want to save the people who can't save themselves. If you keep killing civilians, we'll keep coming. We'll never stop coming. That's what humans do.
The silence that followed was profound. None of the cadets spoke as they processed what they had witnessed.
Sarah Chen died 3 minutes after delivering that message, Admiral Kethvor said.
But her words had already ended the Battle of Korthak 7. Admiral Vorketh ordered an immediate ceasefire and began civilian evacuations. War leader Thakmor withdrew his forces from the system entirely. The holographic display faded, leaving the cadets sitting in darkness with their own thoughts. Within one standard year, the admiral concluded, the entire Third Galactic War had ended. Both sides agreed to negotiate rather than risk another human intervention. The peace accords included Article 847b, which permanently bans humans from participating in galactic conflicts.
Zix finally found his voice. But, sir, if they ended the war, why ban them? Shouldn't we want them as allies? Admiral Kethwar's crystalline features reflected the chamber's emergency lighting.
Because, Cadet Zix, we realized something terrifying about human nature. They don't fight to win wars. They fight to save lives. And they will sacrifice everything, including their own lives, to protect beings they've never met and will never see again. The old officer stood, his movements slow and careful. That kind of moral certainty, that willingness to die for abstract principles, makes them impossible to predict or control.
They cannot be negotiated with when they believe innocent lives are at stake. They cannot be deterred by superior force. They cannot be reasoned out of actions they consider morally necessary. As the chamber lights brightened, Thorak asked the question that was troubling them all: so they're banned because they're too good?
They're banned, Admiral Kethwar corrected, because they make everyone else too good. Every military engagement involving humans results in massive casualties as soldiers from all sides begin prioritizing civilian lives over strategic objectives. Wars become impossible to fight when the warriors start behaving like humans. The cadets file out of Archive Vault 7 in thoughtful silence, each one changed by what they had witnessed. They now understood why humans remained in their distant corner of the galaxy, why no military force had ever been sent to enforce galactic law on Earth, and why the mere mention of human involvement was enough to end most conflicts before they began. As Zix walked back toward the main academy complex, he found himself looking up at the stars and wondering what other impossible things lived in the darkness between worlds. But, mostly, he wondered what would happen if the galaxy ever faced a threat so terrible that they had no choice but to ask the humans for help. He had a feeling that day was coming sooner than anyone wanted to admit. The weeks following their visit to Archive Vault 7 passed in a strange atmosphere at the Galactic Military Academy. Word had somehow spread among the Cadet Corps about the classified briefing, though none of the attendees had spoken directly about what they had learned. Still, there was a noticeable change in how the cadets approached their tactical studies and war games. Zix-47 found himself distracted during combat simulations, wondering what human soldiers would do in similar situations. Would they ignore strategic objectives to save hypothetical civilians? Would they sacrifice tactical advantages to uphold principles that most galactic species considered impractical? The questions haunted him as he struggled through his advanced warfare courses. 3 weeks after the Vault incident, Admiral Kethwar summoned the same group of cadets to his private office. The chamber was sparse by galactic standards, decorated only with commendations from various species and a single, small hologram of a blue-green world that Zix now recognized as Earth. Cadets, the Admiral began without preamble, your performance in tactical simulations has declined significantly since our last meeting. Your instructors report that you've begun questioning established military doctrine and proposing strategies that prioritize civilian protection over strategic objectives.
Thorak shifted uncomfortably in his reinforced chair.
Sir, after learning about the humans, some of our standard tactics seem unnecessarily brutal.
Indeed, Admiral Kethwar nodded.
And this is precisely why knowledge of the Terran intervention event is restricted to senior officers. However, your exposure to this information was necessary for reasons that will soon become clear.
The Admiral activated a holographic display showing current galactic political boundaries. For the past 200 standard cycles, the galaxy has enjoyed unprecedented peace. The threat of human intervention has prevented major conflicts from escalating beyond limited border skirmishes. However, recent intelligence suggests that this peace may be coming to an end. The display zoomed in on the galaxy's outer rim, highlighting a region of space that appeared completely dark. 18 months ago, our deep space monitoring stations began detecting gravitational anomalies in Sector 849 null. The region was supposedly empty space, but we now know it contains something that defies our understanding of physics. Cadet Lyra's scales shifted to a worried blue-green. Something from outside our galaxy?
We believe so, the Admiral confirmed.
The gravitational signatures suggest massive structures moving in coordinated patterns.
More disturbing, every probe we've sent to investigate has simply vanished without transmitting any data.
Jorix's blade arms clicked nervously. Are we looking at a potential invasion? Admiral Kethwar's crystalline features seemed to dim with worry.
6 standard days ago, we received our answer. A probe that had been presumed lost suddenly reappeared in normal space, broadcasting on all frequencies. The Admiral manipulated the display, and, suddenly, the cadets found themselves looking at footage that made their previous education seem trivial by comparison.
The image showed spacecraft unlike anything in galactic records.
They were organic-looking, seeming to grow rather than being built, with surfaces that writhed and shifted like living tissue. The beings piloting these vessels call themselves the Devourers, Admiral Kethvor continued. According to the probe's data, they have consumed 17 galaxies, stripping them of all organic matter before moving on to the next feeding ground. The footage continued, showing scenes of devastation that surpassed anything the cadets had imagined. Entire star systems being systematically dismantled, their planets reduced to barren rock as massive biomechanical harvesting ships extracted every trace of organic material. Their technology is beyond our understanding, the Admiral explained.
They don't use conventional weapons or energy sources. Instead, they appear to manipulate biological processes on a cosmic scale. They can turn a planet's own ecosystem against its inhabitants, or cause stars to emit radiation that transforms organic matter into material they can consume. Zix felt his breathing apparatus struggling to keep up with his increased oxygen demand. How long do we have before they reach inhabited systems?
Based on their current trajectory and speed, approximately 18 standard months, Admiral Kethvor replied grimly. Long enough to prepare defenses, but not long enough to develop new technologies that might be effective against them.
Thorak rumbled deep in his chest. Then, we need to mobilize every fleet in the galaxy.
Unite all species under a single military command.
We've tried, the Admiral said.
But, the unity that humans inadvertently created during the Third Galactic War has been gradually dissolving. Old territorial disputes are resurfacing, trade conflicts are escalating into military posturing, and several species are refusing to commit forces to a unified defense until their local concerns are addressed.
Lyra's scales were now a deep orange of distress. So we're going to face this threat divided? Admiral Kethvor walked to his window, looking out at the Academy's training grounds where young beings from dozens of species practiced the arts of war.
There is one possibility, he said quietly.
One option that the Galactic Defense Council is considering, despite the obvious risks.
The cadets exchanged glances, already knowing what he was about to say. We could ask the humans for help, the Admiral continued. Article 847b contains a provision that allows for human military intervention in cases of galactic extinction-level events. The provision has never been invoked because, frankly, we hoped never to face a threat that would require human involvement.
Jorix's blade arms were vibrating with agitation.
But, sir, you showed us what happens when humans get involved in galactic conflicts.
The unpredictability, the refusal to follow established military doctrine.
Exactly, Admiral Kethvor agreed. And, that unpredictability might be the only thing that could surprise an enemy that has conquered 17 galaxies using conventional tactics. The Admiral returned to his desk and activated a new holographic display.
This one showed Earth in real time, the small blue world spinning peacefully in its distant corner of space.
However, there's a significant problem with this plan. The humans who ended the Third Galactic War are no longer representative of their species.
Zix leaned forward. What do you mean, sir? That was 200 years ago, Admiral Kethvor explained.
The humans who demonstrated such remarkable courage and moral certainty have been dead for over a century.
We have no idea what the current human civilization is like, or whether they would be willing to help us.
The display zoomed in on Earth, showing sprawling cities, orbital installations, and space traffic that suggested a thriving interstellar civilization.
Our intelligence on current human society is extremely limited.
We know they've expanded to several dozen star systems, that they've developed technologies we don't fully understand, and that they've maintained their independence from galactic politics.
Thorak voiced what they were all thinking, so we don't know if the humans who would answer our call would be the same as the ones who saved Korthak 7? That, said Admiral Kethvor, is precisely the question. And it's why you six are going to find out.
The silence that followed was profound.
Lyra was the first to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. You're sending us to Earth?
Not exactly, the Admiral replied. Sending an official diplomatic mission would take months to arrange, assuming the humans would even agree to receive it. Instead, you'll be traveling aboard a science vessel conducting routine surveys near human space. If you happen to encounter human vessels or installations, you'll engage in informal contact to assess their current capabilities and disposition.
Jorix's confusion was obvious.
But, sir, we're just cadets.
Shouldn't this mission be handled by experienced diplomats? Admiral Kethbor's expression grew almost paternal. Cadets, perhaps.
But, you're also the only beings outside the senior command structure who understand what humans are truly capable of. More importantly, you're young enough that humans might be willing to speak freely with you, rather than viewing you as representatives of the galactic establishment that has kept them isolated for 2 centuries. The Admiral stood, activating another holographic display that showed a sleek science vessel. The research ship Curiosity's Edge will depart for the Terran border regions in 3 standard days. Officially, you'll be conducting a study on the effects of prolonged interstellar isolation on developing civilizations. Unofficially, you'll be gathering intelligence on humanity's current military capabilities and their willingness to assist with the Devourer threat. Zix realized his forearms were trembling slightly. What if they've changed? What if they're no longer the species that sacrificed everything to save civilians? Then, Admiral Kethbor said grimly, we'll face the Devourers with conventional tactics and hope for the best. But, if they are still the same humans who ended the Third Galactic War? He paused, looking at each cadet in turn. Then, we might actually have a chance. 2 days later, the 6 cadets stood in the docking bay of the Curiosity's Edge, watching their homeworld shrink to a point of light through the vessel's viewports. The science ship was state-of-the-art, equipped with sensors capable of detecting technological signatures across several light-years and communication systems that could establish contact with virtually any known species. Captain Vorthka, a veteran Kathrani explorer, briefed them as they entered hyperspace. Our route will take us through the neutral zone and into the outer territories where human expansion is most active. We'll begin with passive scans of human installations and shipping routes, gathering data on their technological development and military capabilities. Dr. Zental, the mission's xenosociologist, added her own perspective. We're particularly interested in changes in human social structure and ethical frameworks. The humans who ended the Third Galactic War displayed remarkable unity of purpose and moral conviction. We need to determine if these traits have persisted through their technological and territorial expansion. As the ship settled into its hyperspace cruise, the cadets found themselves with little to do but study the limited intelligence files on current human civilization. The information was frustratingly incomplete, gathered mostly from long-range observations and intercepted communications. Look at this, Thorak rumbled, manipulating a holographic display showing human shipping routes. They've established colonies in 47 star systems, but their expansion pattern doesn't follow any logical resource acquisition strategy. Lyra studied the data, her scales shifting to thoughtful blue. Actually, it does follow a pattern. They're not colonizing the richest systems or the most strategically important ones. They're colonizing systems that can support the largest populations. Jorix's blade arms clicked as he processed this information. So they're still prioritizing civilian welfare over strategic advantage? Zix was examining technical specifications for human spacecraft. The designs were still angular and functional, but the performance characteristics were impressive. Their technology has definitely advanced. These ships are faster and more efficient than most galactic standard designs, but they're still built around the same basic principles we saw in the war footage. Reliability and survivability over sophistication, observed Dr. Zental. Interesting that they've maintained that design philosophy even as their capabilities have improved. The first week of their journey passed uneventfully as they traveled through well-mapped space toward the human border regions. The cadets spent their time reviewing tactical simulations and preparing for first contact scenarios, though none of them really knew what to expect when they encountered actual humans. Their first glimpse of human space came when they dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of a system called ROS-247, where long-range sensors had detected significant human activity. What they found exceeded all their expectations. By the Great Crystal, Captain Vorthka breathed as the sensor data resolved into clear images. Look at the size of those installations. The system contained 3 massive space habitats, each one capable of supporting millions of inhabitants. But what struck the observation team wasn't their size, but their design. The habitats were clearly built for comfort and beauty rather than purely functional efficiency. Gardens and recreational areas were visible through transparent sections, and the overall aesthetic suggested a civilization that valued quality of life. These aren't military installations, Lyra observed. They're cities. They've built actual cities in space. Dr. Zental was recording everything with scientific excitement. The resource allocation is remarkable. They're dedicating significant industrial capacity to purely aesthetic elements. This suggests a society with substantial material abundance. Zix was studying the traffic patterns around the habitats.
Look at the ship movements. They're not following standard efficiency protocols.
Some of those vessels are taking longer routes just to pass through what appear to be scenic areas.
Their observations were interrupted by an incoming communication on standard galactic frequencies.
The transmission was clear and professional. Unknown vessel, this is ROS 247 traffic control.
You are approaching regulated space.
Please identify yourselves and state your intentions.
Captain Vorthka activated the response system. ROS 247 control, this is the research vessel Curiosity's Edge conducting xenosociological studies in the outer territories. We request permission to conduct passive observations of your installations for scientific purposes. The response came quickly. Curiosity's Edge, we show you're traveling under Galactic Defense Force authorization codes. Please hold for customs and immigration processing. Within minutes, a sleek human vessel approached their position.
Unlike the angular military ships from the war footage, this craft had smooth curves and elegant proportions. But the sensor readings were unmistakable. Beneath the aesthetic exterior was a sophisticated weapons platform.
Customs and immigration? Thorak wondered.
They're treating this like a routine civilian encounter. Dr. Zentel was studying the approaching ship with fascination.
The implications are significant.
They've developed bureaucratic procedures for handling unknown alien contact. This suggests extensive experience with interspecies interaction. The human ship took up position alongside the Curiosity's Edge, and another communication arrived. Curiosity's Edge, this is Customs Cutter Peaceful Intent. Captain Sarah Chun Martinez requesting permission to come aboard for standard inspection and documentation review.
Zix felt a chill at the name. Sarah Chen. Could that be related to the soldier from Korthak 7?
Captain Vorthka granted permission for the human delegation to board, and soon they found themselves face to face with their first contemporary humans.
Captain Chun Martinez was a tall woman with dark hair and intelligent eyes that seemed to take in every detail of her surroundings.
She was accompanied by two junior officers whose casual competence suggested extensive training. "Welcome to human space," Captain Chun Martinez said with a warm smile.
"It's been a while since we've had visitors from the galactic community.
I hope you'll forgive our caution, but we've learned to be careful about foreign military vessels."
Dr. Zental stepped forward as the designated first contact specialist. "Captain, we appreciate your courtesy.
We're conducting research on the development of isolated civilizations and would be honored to include human society in our studies." Captain Chan Martinez's expression shifted slightly, becoming more guarded.
Isolated civilizations? Is that how the galactic community views humanity?
The question caught Dr. Zental off guard, and Zix could see her struggling to find an appropriate response. Captain Chen Martinez continued, "Dr. Zental, we're aware of Article 847b and the reasons behind it. We know that we've been effectively quarantined from galactic affairs for over 2 centuries.
Thorak couldn't contain his surprise. "You know about Article 847b?
Captain Chan Martinez turned to him with a slight smile.
"Cadet Thorak, we know quite a lot about galactic politics and military doctrine. Just because we've been excluded doesn't mean we've been inactive."
The implications of her statement were staggering. Not only did the humans know about their quarantine, they had been monitoring galactic affairs closely enough to identify individual cadets by sight.
"Captain," Lyra said carefully, "may I ask how you recognized us?"
"Your vessel's configuration matches Galactic Military Academy training ships," Captain Chun Martinez replied. "And your group composition, 6 cadets from different species, traveling with a research team, matches the profile for advanced xenopolitical studies. It wasn't difficult to deduce why you're really here." Zix realized that the humans weren't just technologically advanced, they had been systematically studying galactic civilization for 200 years.
Which raised an obvious question: if you know about your quarantine and our purposes, why are you allowing us to proceed?
Captain Chan Martinez was quiet for a moment, her expression growing serious. "Because we've been monitoring deep space gravitational anomalies in Sector 849 null, and we know something is coming that will threaten every inhabited world in the galaxy." The silence that followed was profound.
Dr. Zental was the first to speak. "You're aware of the Devourer threat?" We've been tracking their approach for over a year, Captain Chun Martinez confirmed.
We know what they did to the Andromeda satellite galaxies, and we know they'll reach the Milky Way within 18 months. She looked at each of the cadets in turn, her gaze steady and somehow reassuring. The real question, cadets, is whether the galactic community is finally ready to work with humanity as equals, or if you're here to ask us to die for principles that the rest of the galaxy abandoned long ago. The bluntness of her statement left them all speechless. But Zix found himself thinking about the footage from Cortex 7, about humans who had voluntarily flown into certain death to protect beings they had never met. He looked into Captain Chun Martinez's eyes and saw something that made him both hopeful and terrified. He saw the same moral certainty that had ended the Third Galactic War. Captain Chun Martinez's words hung in the air of the Curiosity's Edge conference room like a challenge that none of the galactic representatives could ignore. The human officer had positioned herself at the far end of the table, seemingly relaxed but with an alertness that reminded Zix uncomfortably of the predatory grace he'd seen in the Cortex 7 footage.
I think, Dr. Zental said carefully, there may be some misunderstanding about our mission parameters. Is there?
Captain Chun Martinez asked, pulling up a holographic display that showed the Curiosity's Edge's complete flight plan. You departed Zenthra Prime 3 standard days after the Galactic Defense Council's emergency session regarding the Devourer threat. Your route includes stops at 7 key observation points along our border, and your cargo manifest includes communication equipment capable of establishing real-time contact with Galactic Command. She manipulated the display, highlighting their ship's concealed military-grade sensors.
This is a reconnaissance mission disguised as scientific research.
You're here to determine whether humanity is still the same species that ended the Third Galactic War, and whether we're willing to sacrifice ourselves again for the greater good.
Thorax's rocky features showed his discomfort. Captain, how could you know about classified galactic military discussions?
Captain Chun Martinez smiled, but there was no humor in the expression. Because, Cadet Thorax, humanity learned something important during our 2 centuries of enforced isolation. If you're going to be quarantined from galactic civilization, you'd better make sure you know why. She activated another display, this one showing a vast network of monitoring stations throughout human space.
For the past 200 years, we've been watching.
Every galactic conflict, every political development, every technological advancement, we've been documenting it all.
Dr. Zental leaned forward, her scientific curiosity overriding diplomatic protocol. But why? If you accepted the quarantine, why maintain such extensive surveillance?
Because, Captain Chun Martinez replied, we wanted to understand whether the galaxy had learned anything from our intervention, or whether you were simply waiting for another crisis to justify calling us back.
Jorix's blade arms clicked nervously. And, what did you conclude? Captain Chun Martinez's expression grew grim.
That galactic civilization has spent 200 years becoming more efficient at avoiding the moral questions that make war uncomfortable. You've developed precision weapons that minimize collateral damage not because you value civilian life more, but because it's easier to justify conflicts when the casualties are clean and distant.
Lyra's scales shifted to defensive orange. That's not fair.
The galaxy has been at peace for 2 centuries.
Has it?
Captain Chun Martinez challenged.
Or have you simply redefined warfare to exclude anything that might trigger the moral awakening that humans caused during the Third Galactic War?
She brought up another display, this one showing dozens of smaller conflicts throughout the galaxy over the past 2 centuries. 17 border wars, 43 resource conflicts, and over 100 police actions against developing civilizations. All carefully managed to stay below the threshold that would require invoking Article 847b. Zix stared at the data, feeling sick as he recognized several conflicts from his military history courses.
We weren't taught about most of these.
Of course not, Captain Chun Martinez said. Because acknowledging them would raise questions about whether the galaxy truly learned anything from humanity's intervention, or whether you simply learned to fight wars that humans wouldn't care about. The silence that followed was uncomfortable, but Captain Chun Martinez wasn't finished. But the Devourers aren't a border dispute or a resource conflict. They're an extinction-level threat that will require exactly the kind of moral clarity and self-sacrifice that the galaxy has been avoiding for 2 centuries. Dr. Zental gathered her composure. Captain, if humanity has been monitoring galactic affairs so closely, then you understand the magnitude of the threat we face.
The Devourers have consumed 17 galaxies.
Their technology is beyond our understanding. Without unity among all galactic species, without human intervention, Captain Chun Martinez interrupted.
That's what you mean, isn't it?
The galactic community has had 2 centuries to develop the unity and moral purpose that might stand against an existential threat. Instead, you've maintained the same fractious, self-interested political structure that required human intervention to end the Third Galactic War.
Thorak's voice was a low rumble. If you understand the threat, why aren't you offering to help?
Captain Chun Martinez stood, walking to the viewport that showed human space stations in the distance.
Because, Cadet Thorak, we need to know that this time will be different.
200 years ago, humans died to save beings who immediately went back to the same political and military systems that had made their sacrifice necessary. She turned back to face them. If we're going to fight the Devourers, we need to know that the victory will mean something. That the galaxy we save will be worth saving. The bluntness of her statement hit them like a physical blow. Zix found his voice first. What would convince you? Partnership, Captain Chun Martinez replied immediately. Not as a last resort when conventional tactics fail, but as equals from the beginning. If humanity is going to risk extinction to save the galaxy, then humanity should have a voice in how that galaxy is governed after the threat is ended. Dr. Zentel's eyes widened. You're talking about fundamental changes to the galactic political structure.
Yes, Captain Chun Martinez confirmed.
We're talking about a government that includes human ethical and moral perspectives in its decision-making processes. A military doctrine that prioritizes civilian protection over strategic objectives. A legal system that recognizes individual rights as superior to state interests.
Jorix's confusion was obvious.
But those principles would make warfare nearly impossible.
Exactly, Captain Chun Martinez said with satisfaction. Which is precisely why they're necessary if you want to avoid future existential threats.
Lyra's scales were cycling through colors as she processed the implications.
You're saying that humanity won't help unless the galaxy agrees to fundamental political reform?
We're saying that humanity won't repeat the same mistake twice, Captain Chun Martinez corrected. If we're going to sacrifice ourselves again, it will be for a galaxy that has actually learned from our previous sacrifice. The human captain activated a new display, this one showing detailed intelligence on the Devourer forces.
However, we're also not naive. We understand that the immediate threat takes priority over long-term political considerations. The data was far more comprehensive than anything the galactic military possessed.
Ship configurations, attack patterns, biological composition of the Devourer forces, the humans had somehow gathered intelligence that would have required close-range reconnaissance missions.
How did you get this information? Dr. Zentel asked in amazement.
By doing what humans do best, Captain Chun Martinez replied. We sent volunteers on what were essentially suicide missions to gather intelligence on an enemy that kills everything it encounters.
Zix felt that familiar chill. You sent people to die just to gather information?
We asked for volunteers for extremely dangerous reconnaissance missions, Captain Chun Martinez corrected.
37 humans volunteered for missions with less than a 5% survival rate. 6 survived to transmit their intelligence.
The casual way she discussed such enormous sacrifice reminded Zix forcefully of the footage from Korthak 7. These were still the same humans, willing to die for abstract principles and the protection of beings they'd never met.
Captain, Thorak rumbled slowly, if humanity has this level of intelligence on the Devourers, and you understand the threat they represent, why haven't you shared this information with Galactic Command?
Captain Chun Martinez's expression grew cold. Because sharing intelligence with a command structure that has spent 2 centuries preparing for conventional warfare would be pointless.
The Devourers can't be defeated with traditional tactics.
She manipulated the display, showing battle footage from the consumed galaxies. Every civilization that has faced the Devourers has tried the same approach: unite their fleets, develop better weapons, establish defensive perimeters. All of them failed because they were fighting an enemy that doesn't follow the rules of conventional warfare. The footage showed scenes of devastation that made the Third Galactic War look like a minor skirmish.
Entire fleets being consumed by organic structures that converted their mass into more Devourer vessels.
Planetary defenses being turned against their creators as the Devourers somehow corrupted the very technology meant to stop them. The Devourers don't conquer, Captain Chun Martinez explained.
They convert.
Every victory against them provides them with more resources to continue their expansion.
Traditional military doctrine is worse than useless, it's counterproductive.
Dr. Zental was recording everything with growing excitement and horror.
Then, how can they be stopped?
By doing something they've never encountered before, Captain Chun Martinez replied.
By refusing to fight them according to their rules. By prioritizing goals they can't understand or predict. Lyra's scales had settled into a confused yellow.
Such as valuing individual lives over strategic objectives. Such as sacrificing tactical advantages to save enemy civilians. Such as continuing to fight for principles even when victory becomes impossible.
The implications hit Zix like a revelation. You're saying that human moral certainty isn't just ethically superior, it's tactically effective against the Devourers?
We're saying that beings who will die for abstract principles are impossible for a purely consumptive species to understand or counter, Captain Chun Martinez confirmed.
The Devourers have conquered 17 galaxies because every previous opponent eventually chose survival over principle. They literally cannot comprehend the concept of voluntary self-sacrifice for the benefit of strangers.
She brought up a final display showing human fleet deployments throughout their space.
Humanity has been preparing for this war for over a century.
Not by building bigger weapons or stronger defenses, but by creating a military doctrine based on the same principles that ended the Third Galactic War.
Jorix leaned forward to study the deployment patterns.
Your fleets are positioned to protect civilian populations, not strategic assets. Our fleets are positioned to demonstrate that there are beings in this galaxy who value life more than victory, Captain Chun Martinez corrected. When the Devourers encounter that kind of opposition, they'll face something they've never had to overcome, an enemy that considers losing while protecting innocence to be preferable to winning through acceptable losses. The human captain deactivated the displays and returned to her seat.
So, cadets, you have a choice to make.
You can return to Galactic Command with our intelligence on the Devourers and our tactical recommendations.
But, those recommendations will only work if the galactic military is willing to adopt human ethical principles as core doctrine. Dr. Zental spoke carefully, and if the Galactic Command is unwilling to make such fundamental changes?
Then, humanity will defend our own space according to our own principles, Captain Chun Martinez replied. And, the rest of the galaxy will face the Devourers with conventional tactics that have failed 17 times before.
Thorax's voice was troubled. You would abandon billions of beings to certain death?
We would refuse to participate in a strategy that is guaranteed to fail while providing the galaxy with false hope, Captain Chun Martinez corrected. Humanity learned something important from the Third Galactic War: good intentions without moral courage are worse than useless. Zix found himself thinking about the human soldier who had crawled through energy weapon fire for 6 hours to deliver a message that ended a war.
Captain, what would it take to convince Galactic Command to adopt human tactical doctrine? Captain Chun Martinez considered the question seriously.
Proof that it works.
Demonstration that human principles can achieve military objectives that conventional tactics cannot.
She stood, indicating that the meeting was coming to an end.
Fortunately, you're about to get that demonstration.
Our sensors show a Devourer scout force entering this system. They'll be here within 6 standard hours. The silence that followed was absolute.
Finally, Dr. Zental found her voice. A scout force? Here?
3 vessels, approximately the size of heavy cruisers, Captain Chun Martinez confirmed with calm professionalism. Intelligence suggests they're advanced reconnaissance for the main force, gathering data on galactic military capabilities and defensive positions.
Lyra's scales were cycling rapidly through fear colors. What do we do?
Captain Chun Martinez smiled, and, for the first time since their meeting began, the expression seemed genuinely warm.
We demonstrate why humans are banned from galactic warfare.
And, you get to witness firsthand whether our tactical doctrine is effective against an enemy that has never been defeated. She moved toward the hatch leading back to her customs cutter. I suggest you maintain position and record everything.
If we succeed, your testimony might convince Galactic Command to adopt our methods. If we fail.
She shrugged. Well, conventional tactics would have failed faster.
As she prepared to leave, Zix called out, Captain, what are your chances of success?
Captain Chun Martinez paused at the hatch. Cadet, you're thinking in terms of conventional military analysis. Success and failure aren't measured the same way when you're fighting for principles rather than objectives. She looked at each of them in turn. If those scout ships leave this system with intelligence that will help the Devourers kill billions of innocent beings, then we will have failed regardless of our casualties. If they're stopped from gathering that intelligence, then we will have succeeded regardless of our losses. As the human captain departed, the cadets and researchers found themselves alone with the knowledge that they were about to witness either humanity's vindication or its destruction. Zix moved to the viewport, looking out at the peaceful human installations in the distance.
Within hours, those space cities filled with millions of civilians would be under attack by an enemy that had never been defeated.
And humanity's response would either prove that their moral certainty was a practical military doctrine, or demonstrate that even human determination had limits. Either way, Zix realized, they were about to learn something that would change the galaxy forever. Assuming, of course, that any of them survived to share the knowledge. The Devourer scout ships dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Ross 247 system like nightmares made manifest in reality. From their observation position aboard the Curiosity's edge, the cadets watched in horrified fascination as three organic-looking vessels began their approach toward the human installations. Each Devourer ship was roughly the size of a galactic heavy cruiser, but their resemblance to conventional spacecraft ended there. Their hulls seemed to writhe and pulse with their own biological rhythm, and sensor readings showed energy signatures unlike anything in the galactic databases. Most disturbing of all, the ships appeared to be growing as they moved, adding mass from some unknown source. By the Great Crystal, Captain Vorthka whispered from his position at the sensor console.
Those aren't ships. They're organisms. Dr. Zentel was recording everything with scientific fascination tinged by terror.
The energy readings are impossible.
They're somehow converting vacuum energy into organic matter. Each ship is literally feeding on space itself. Zix watched the long-range displays with growing dread.
The Devourers were moving slowly but deliberately toward the human space habitats, and there was something methodical about their approach that suggested vast intelligence behind the alien forms.
Where are the human defenses?
Lyra asked, her scales shifting through rapid cycles of stress colors.
They should be mobilizing their fleets. Thorak was studying the tactical displays with confusion. I'm not seeing any movement from human military assets.
Their orbital platforms are active, but no ships are launching to intercept.
Captain Vorthka enhanced the sensor resolution, focusing on the human installations. Wait. Look at the civilian platforms.
What they saw defied all conventional military logic. Instead of evacuating the civilian populations from the space habitats, the humans were actually moving more people into them. Transport ships were arriving from throughout the system, and the habitats themselves were adjusting their positions to form a loose defensive perimeter around the outer planets. They're not evacuating, Jorix observed, his blade arms clicking with agitation.
They're concentrating civilian populations in the path of the attack. Dr. Zental was checking and rechecking her readings. This has to be some kind of mistake. No military doctrine would deliberately expose civilian populations to enemy action.
But, even as she spoke, they could see human warships taking positions not in front of the civilian platforms, but behind them. The humans were literally placing their military assets in positions where they couldn't engage the enemy without risking civilian casualties.
This is insane, Thorak rumbled.
They're making it impossible for themselves to fight effectively. Zix found himself remembering Captain Sean Martinez's words about refusing to follow the Devourer's rules.
Maybe that's the point.
Maybe they're doing something the Devourers won't expect.
Their speculation was interrupted by an incoming communication on Galactic standard frequencies.
The transmission was coming from the lead Devourer vessel, and the voice that emerged was unlike anything they had ever heard, a harmony of tones that suggested multiple beings speaking in perfect unison.
Biological entities of Ross 247, the Devourers announced, their words somehow bypassing the translation matrix to be understood directly.
You will cease resistance and prepare for consumption. Your organic matter will be preserved and integrated into our collective.
Resistance will result in waste and suffering.
The response came immediately from the human space habitats. But, instead of a military commander, the voice that answered belonged to what sounded like an elderly woman. Devourer vessels, this is Administrator Elena Vesquez speaking for the civilian population of Ross 247. We understand your intentions, but we respectfully decline your offer. These systems contain 14 million sentient beings who have chosen to remain free. The Devourer's response was immediate and chilling: freedom is inefficient.
Individual consciousness creates waste. You will be improved through integration.
"We appreciate your perspective," Administrator Vasquez replied with what sounded like genuine politeness, "but we've found that individual consciousness, even with its inefficiencies, produces things that your collective might find valuable. Beauty, art, love, sacrifice, things that can only exist when beings choose to create them freely." There was a pause before the devourers responded. "These concepts serve no survival function.
They will be eliminated during integration." Then, Administrator Vasquez said, her voice carrying a sadness that somehow made it more terrifying, "I'm afraid we'll have to insist on remaining unintegrated."
What happened next would be studied in military academies for centuries to come. The devourer ships began their attack not with conventional weapons, but with something far more insidious. Energy beams struck the human installations, but instead of causing explosions or structural damage, they began changing the very molecular structure of the targets. Zix watched in horror as sections of the space habitats began transforming, their metal and composite structures becoming organic tissue that pulsed with alien life. But, instead of spreading throughout the installations as the beams intended, the transformation was somehow being contained and redirected. "Look at the casualty reports," Lyra whispered, her voice filled with awe.
"They're not losing anyone." Dr. Zentel was studying the readings with scientific excitement. "Impossible.
The humans are somehow channeling the devourer conversion beams through sections of their habitats that have been specifically prepared for the purpose."
"They're using the enemy's own weapons to create. What are they creating?"
The answer became clear as the modified sections of the habitats began producing new structures. But, instead of the writhing organic forms that characterize devourer technology, the humans were creating something beautiful. Gardens bloomed in the vacuum of space, protected by energy fields but somehow thriving in the impossible conditions. Art installations of incredible complexity began growing from the converted organic matter.
"They're turning weapons into beauty," Zix breathed.
"They're using the devourer's own conversion technology to create art." The devourers seemed as confused as the galactic observers. Their ship stopped firing and began broadcasting on all frequencies, purpose unknown.
"Request clarification of tactical objectives." Administrator Vasquez's response came with warm amusement. "We're demonstrating that individual consciousness creates things your collective cannot.
Beauty that exists for its own sake. Art that serves no survival function. Love that makes beings willingly sacrifice for strangers."
As if summoned by her words, the human military vessels finally began to move.
But, instead of attacking the devourer ships, they began repositioning themselves to protect the newly created art installations. Human soldiers were literally dying to defend sculptures and gardens that had been created from enemy weapons. "This is the most tactically unsound thing I've ever witnessed," Captain Vorthka muttered. "They're sacrificing military assets to protect non-functional artistic displays." But, the effect on the devourers was immediate and dramatic.
The 3 scout ships began showing signs of instability.
Their organic hulls were fluctuating wildly, and their coordinated movement patterns were breaking down into chaotic, individual motions.
Dr. Zentel was recording everything with growing excitement.
"The devourer ships are losing coherence. Whatever binds their collective consciousness together is being disrupted by exposure to individual creativity." The reason became clear as human transmissions began broadcasting throughout the system. Not military communications, but personal messages from the civilians in the space habitats. Children sending drawings to their parents.
Musicians composing songs about the strange beauty of the battle. Poets creating verses about the courage of people they'd never met.
Each transmission was an expression of individual consciousness choosing to create beauty in the face of certain death. And, with each broadcast, the devourer ships became more unstable. Individual expression, Jorix realized, his blade arms clicking rapidly. The devourers are a collective consciousness. They literally cannot process the concept of individual creativity that serves no survival function. One of the devourer ships suddenly broke formation entirely, its hull configuration shifting randomly as if its controlling intelligence was fighting with itself. Emergency broadcasts began emanating from the vessel in what sounded like dozens of different voices, each one desperately trying to maintain individual identity.
"What's happening to them?" Lyra asked.
Administrator Vasquez's voice provided the answer. "When a collective consciousness encounters enough examples of individual creativity, some of its component beings begin to remember what it felt like to be individuals. The collective starts breaking apart from the inside." The second devourer ship began showing similar signs of instability, its organic hull actually beginning to separate into smaller vessels as different consciousness fragments fought for control. But the third ship seemed to be adapting, its form stabilizing as it apparently purged the affected consciousness components.
Adaptive response detected, the remaining devourer announced. Compromised elements eliminated. Resuming consumption protocol.
This ship's attack was different, more focused and far more destructive. Instead of conversion beams, it began firing projectiles that seemed to consume everything they touched, leaving empty space where human installations had been moments before. The human response was immediate and absolute. Every military vessel in the system began converging on the attacking devourer ship. But they weren't firing weapons or attempting to ram it. Instead, they were broadcasting. Attention all consciousness within the devourer vessel, came the voice of what sounded like a human child. My name is Maria Santos, and I'm 7 years old. I want to tell you about my pet rabbit. More voices joined in, thousands of them. Every human in the system was broadcasting personal stories, individual experiences, creative expressions. Children describing their drawings. Adults sharing memories of people they loved. Artists explaining the emotions that had driven them to create beauty. The effect on the devourer ship was catastrophic. Its hull began writhing as if in agony, and its weapons stopped firing entirely. Emergency transmissions poured from the vessel as individual consciousnesses within the collective began asserting themselves. I remember. I had a name, came one voice. There was someone I loved, came another. I created something beautiful once, whispered a third. The devourer ship began tearing itself apart as component beings fought to maintain their individual identity against the collective that had absorbed them. Within minutes, the vessel had broken into dozens of smaller craft, each one broadcasting desperate messages of individual consciousness awakening from collective absorption. Zix realized he was witnessing something unprecedented in galactic history. Beings who had been consumed by the devourers were breaking free and reclaiming their individual identity through exposure to human expressions of creativity and love. But the victory came at a terrible cost. The human installations that had been destroyed in the final attack had contained over 2 million civilians. The space habitats that remained were damaged and barely functional. The human fleet had suffered casualties that would have broken any conventional military force. And yet, as the cadets watched, the humans began immediately working to rescue the newly freed beings from the destroyed devourer ships. They were treating former enemies with the same care they gave their own wounded, providing medical assistance and psychological support to beings who had just been trying to consume them. This is what humans do, Administrator Vasquez's voice came over the communications system. This is why they're banned from galactic warfare. Not because they're too weak, but because they make it impossible to fight wars the way wars are supposed to be fought. Dr. Zentel was speechless as she reviewed the battle recordings. They won by sacrificing their tactical advantages. They defeated an enemy that had conquered 17 galaxies by refusing to treat them as enemies. Captain Chan Martinez's voice joined the communication net. Cadets, you've seen what human military doctrine can accomplish against the devourers. Individual consciousness, creative expression, and the willingness to sacrifice for abstract principles are weapons that a collective species cannot counter. Thorax's voice was heavy with awe. But the casualties would have been total if we had used conventional tactics, Captain Chan Martinez replied. The devourers aren't just trying to kill us, they're trying to absorb us. Traditional military resistance just provides them with more resources. Only by demonstrating the value of individual consciousness can we hope to turn their own people against them. Lyra's scales had settled into thoughtful blue. So the real war isn't about destroying the devourers. It's about saving the individuals trapped within their collective. Exactly, Captain Chan Martinez confirmed. And that kind of war can only be fought by beings who value individual life more than strategic objectives. Beings who will create beauty in the face of destruction and offer love to former enemies. Zix looked out at the aftermath of the battle, where human rescue ships were working alongside freed devourer individuals to save survivors from both sides. It was the most militarily inefficient thing he had ever witnessed, and probably the most strategically brilliant. Admiral Kethvor was right, he said quietly. Humans don't fight to win wars. They fight to save lives. And, against an enemy like the devourers, that's the only strategy that can work. As the Curiosity's Edge prepared to return to galactic space with their intelligence, Zix found himself thinking about the choice facing the Galactic Defense Council. They could adopt human tactical doctrine and accept that warfare would become something entirely different, messier, more costly in conventional terms, but ultimately more effective against enemies that couldn't understand individual creativity and moral courage. Or they could try to defeat the Devourers with conventional tactics and watch 17 galaxies worth of failures repeat themselves in their own space. Zix had seen enough to know which choice he would recommend. The question was whether the galaxy was ready to learn what humans had been trying to teach them for over 200 years, that some things are more important than victory, and that those things are exactly what make victory possible against truly impossible odds. The journey home would give them time to prepare their report. But Zix suspected that the real test would come when the Galactic Defense Council had to decide whether they were willing to fight like humans, with all the moral complexity and tactical impossibility that entailed. Looking back at Ross 247, where humans and freed Devourers were working together to rebuild the destroyed installations, Zix thought he knew what choice the galaxy would have to make. The only question was whether they would make it before the main Devourer force arrived and made the choice for them.